Hello, I'm Berlinologist. I've had recorded something 8 years ago regarding my DVD collection on Berlin. Because of this coronavirus, I've decided to reactivate that channel, and as a result of it, I really wanted to sort of think about what I was going to do with it, because initially when I started it first, it wasn't anything that I thought I would take seriously, but things have now changed, things have moved on, and as time goes on, you think differently as to what you thought about 8 years ago. So I've decided to reactivate it. At the time, I wanted to be a tour guide, and to be a tour guide, you have to really know your subject and know it very well. Also, you want to have it that you can know as many details as you possibly can. So if you have if you're speaking to a group of 10 people, 12 people, 15 people, you want them to get a picture of what Berlin was like. What I wanted to do was to talk about Berlin and specialise about the history of Berlin from between 1914 and 1994, which for some people it'll appear quite obvious, because 1914, that was the start of the First World War, and in 1994 that's when they reburied Frederick the Great at Sanssouci, because his wish was to be buried with his whippets. And 1989 would have been the obvious time to have sort of concluded it, because that was the fall of the Berlin Wall. But I always believe that there's a lot that happens after an event as historic as the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89. So what I've decided to do is to start off with films of the Hitler bunker. So anyone can see on YouTube, you just type it in, Hitler bunker, and you'll be able to see that all it is like a patch of grass and a car park, and that during the East German regime, they wanted to destroy the bunker, but they only sort of destroyed certain layers of it, so a lot of the bunker is still underground. So what I've decided to do was to start off there, and then decide what I want to do after that. You know, what I wanted to review, certain times in history, what I wanted to talk about, but I thought I'd start off with the Hitler bunker first. I've got 5 films on the last days of Adolf Hitler. The first one that I'd like to talk about is one called Der letzte Akt, which is the last act, and it stars Oskar Werner. And why this is fascinating, why this is fascinating to me, is because it was near the time of when those last days, crazy days of Adolf Hitler and his minions in the bunker. So this was made in 1957, so this was 12 years. This movie was shot in black and white, and it sort of adds to the realism of it. And watching it is, I get the impression that this is the template of what was to come in terms of the films that were made after it. I watched it only recently, and it kept me spellbound. The main protagonist is a fictional character, but a lot of the events in the bunker are pretty much true to the events as they happened. That's called Die letzte Akt, which is the last act. Okay, this one, Hitler the Last 10 Days, with Alec Guinness. this is quite interesting in the sense that this is a more sedate Adolf Hitler. That Alec Guinness plays is sort of more laid back character than we have the impression of him, you know, because you have to think with the bunker at the time, it was deep underground. You sort of lose, the longer you stay under there, the more sense of you lose reality to the events, and the events outside are changing very, very quickly. And so as Hitler's looking at his maps, he, you know, of where his troops are and the troops that he has left are getting less and less as the war draws to an end. But yeah, this is more a sort of a laid-back Adolf Hitler, I would say, by Alec Guinness. Still interesting, and there is an author. The Last 10 Days is based on a book by Gerhard Bolt. It's called The Last Days of the Chancellery. Now, I haven't read that book. I'd love to, because it's these little details, because each book will add something to the story, and it's a question of you having a list of all the details, those tiny little, almost insignificant details that will bring the past to life. So, yeah, I would say it's a good film. As a film, but I just think that Alec Guinness's interpretation of Hitler's perhaps just a little too laid back for my taste, but each to his own. Okay, so I've got another one called The Death of Adolf Hitler. This is a drama, so this is a little bit different, and Frank Finlay plays Adolf Hitler, and I think he does a good interpretation of him. The facts have been juggled around, you know, and played about a bit, so it's not as accurate as you'd expect, say, the book The Bunker, or Trevor Roper's book on the Hitler bunker. But I believe the interpretation is very good. But you bear in mind, all the actors and actresses are using English accents. So, but to watch this here, The Death of Adolf Hitler. This is one of my favourites. This is The Bunker with Anthony Hopkins. This, in my mind, is one of the best films on the Führer bunker, and Anthony Hopkins' interpretation of Adolf Hitler is just astounding. I mean, he really gets under the skin of the character, and you sense the desperation, as though, you know, they could still win the war, and which is delusional. But if you're in the bunker and you spend all that time, and I believe Hitler he only came out in like 2 days out of like over 100 days in the bunker. That does tell you something. And I mean, his mental health, his physical health is deteriorating consistently, and he looks a lot older than his 56 years. And but this is told from the point of view of Albert Speer, Hitler's architect. Now, Albert Speer is an interesting character because he had the reputation of being a good Nazi. That's what they called him, the good Nazi. And in my opinion, Albert Speer should have hung with the rest of Hitler's gang, as they were known, or the henchmen. He knew exactly what was going on. He comes across as a really slick diplomat or a politician that can wheedle his way out of it, you know, with a good education and immaculately tailored suits, and being able to charm those that interview him, and you know, give everybody an impression that he's this really good guy. But he knew exactly what was going on, and one of the clues was he wanted to rebuild Berlin in Hitler's image. So if you have someone who has the power to say this will be done, and despite the cost and the consequences of those of your plans, then it will be done. I mean, Hitler had that power, that type of power, and they actually started to evacuate or force people from their homes in order to pull down their apartments to then build Germania as Berlin would one day be known, or that was because of the Nazi regime believed, you know, that it would go on for 1,000 years. So they knew where the Jews were living, and Speer did have them sent to the concentration camps. He knew exactly what was going on, but he always denied it, and I think it was convenient when he died in 1981 in London, because more of the documents in the archive were... Okay. Now the final film that I'd like to review is the one called Downfall. It's by Oliver Hirschbiegel, if I pronounce that correctly. Why I put this last is, I would say that this is number one. I mean, if you only want to watch one film, I'd recommend this one. But I'd also recommend the Anthony Hopkins. I think that's a great film. That really is. But this looks like a film. This has a realism that I would sort of call like a documentary film type film. That they get it so accurate, and there's so many of the events in the bunker occurred as a result of eyewitness testimony. And there is a secretary by the name of Trudel Junge. So it's from her point of view that this film got made. So they used her diaries. So it was her witness. She was a witness to what was going on at the time. I think this is... I don't think this could be bettered. I think this really is the best. And I for a long time believed that the Anthony Hopkins version was the best, but really I couldn't put a Rizzler between them, because the Anthony Hopkins one, that looks more like a film, and this one looks more like a documentary. So I'd recommend that you see The Downfall. I mean, it really was the end. I mean, for Hitler, it was... He felt betrayed. He felt betrayed by the Wehrmacht. He felt betrayed by his officers. He felt betrayed by Himmler and Göring. He felt betrayed by Albert Speer. And I think it was at that point that he decided to end his life. And he also knew that the Russians were only 200 metres away from the bunker itself. So he really was in a vice, and this vice was getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. There was just no way out. Had he left, and you know, there's these conspiracy theories that he'd escaped to Argentina, I think it's just wishful thinking. Where could he have gone? And even if he did, he would have had to have 24-hour care. You know, there would have had to be, he would have had to have a physician, a nurse to take care of him. And by then he would have been such a broken man. He'd lost the war. I mean, he was fighting on 6 fronts. You know, people often say it was 2, the East Front and the West Front. No, he was fighting on 6 fronts. He was fighting the Russians on the Eastern Front. He was fighting the Allies on the Western Front. He was fighting the Allies up the boot of Italy. He was fighting on the Atlantic, it's 4. He was fighting the air war, which is 5. And he was fighting the Jews, which is 6. Think of all the resources it takes to be able to fight on 6 fronts. I mean, it really was the end for him. And this idea that he escaped and gone to Argentina is just fantasy. He'd never have done it. He was too ill. They suspect that he had Parkinson's. You know, his arm was constantly trembling. His right arm was constantly trembling, and he would have to hold on to his coat, or he'd put a hand over his other hand to stop it from shaking as best he could. And he couldn't sign his name. He'd always have to put his hand on this other in order for him to sign. He just couldn't have done it. I mean, and even if he did get to Argentina, he wouldn't have lived that long. He was a broken man. It really, really was the end. And he knew it. And as the saying going, he went down with the ship. So once he put a bullet in his temple and he bit on the cyanide pill at the same time, that would be the end of the National Socialism. It really was. However, it did. The last gasp was when Joseph Goebbels was still in a bunker with his wife and his 6 children, and that lasted for 1 day, and that was the end of the National Socialism. It really did go. It really was the end by then, and everybody knew it to be true. So that concludes my review on the 6. Is it 6? Yeah, I think it's the 6 films that I've reviewed. If you are going to go through them, I'd recommend all of them. I really would, if you're really into that sort of thing. However, especially from looking at it from different points of view. But if you were to pick just one, Downfall is by far the best. That concludes the reviews. Take care.